I'm joined and really featuring Lindsay Hansen, the Director of Learning and Development of Riviera, which is Riviera Partners, one of Tiller's customers. And I'm the head of customer success. So I have the absolute joy of getting to work with Lindsay on a very frequent and ongoing basis. And it's a highlight of my job, highlight of my day. Lindsay is a seasoned workforce leader with over a decade of experience in various industries and business profiles from privately owned through Fortune 50. Armed with an advanced design thinking certificate from IDOU, she never wavers on her commitment to curiosity and empathy. And those are, I know, two topics that we'll be talking about today. Most recently, she's been building a learning and performance enablement function at Riviera Partners, a boutique tech executive search firm committed to helping people and companies reach their full potential. And so with that, like, let's dive right in and, start with like the very basics. Lindsay, what do you see as the most foundational aspects when it comes to co-creating development of the workforce?
Yeah, I think, well, so first of all, one thing I was thinking about this morning as I was preparing was like, why is it important to co-create? Like we didn't talk about that in our prep. And I think it's important to co-create it because in my experience in L&D, I've always felt, and I know my colleagues have always felt like we're kind of like banging our heads against a brick wall, trying to get others to want to develop, to see the benefit of learning and development. And I think there's also probably some frustration from the business side of like, why isn't L&D doing more? And I think at the end of the day, it's all of us together that are really have to work together to co-create the development of the workforce. And philosophically, the base foundation is just mindset and environment. I think the easiest way to think about that is like planting the right seed in the right soil. And so for instance, if you take a coffee bean and you put it in a really neutral soil, you're going to get suboptimal coffee. Your coffee isn't going to be great, right? But if you put it in slightly acidic soil, it's going to be awesome. And so if you, without like deliberately crafting a culture that's focused on development, there's really nothing that we can say here today that's going to grow the proverbial coffee bean. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because when in my role of customer success, I get the opportunity to talk to different, leaders of L&D and different organizations and asking them about, how is it that you have such a high uptake in your learning and development programs, and other organizations struggle with that. And, it's what you're talking about. Like it's not the, sole responsibility of learning and development. So what are some of
Totally.
the things to, really build in and bake into the organization and to watch out for in order to, create this collective responsibility and really make it feel collective, as opposed to the organization looking at like you and being like,
Right.
Lindsay, what's up?
I think tactically, the first thing to do is know where you're trying to go. Like understand from your leaders, what are you trying to achieve as an organization and why? So at the end of the day, where are you trying to go? We talk about these as outcomes in L&D, and a lot of us that have been in L&D for a long time would think of learning outcomes, and these are more business outcomes, right? And so an outcome might be, let's take the coffee bean, and let's say you want to create a AI coffee maker that's just the pinnacle of tech company perks. Like this coffee maker is so phenomenal that it's like reading the weather. It knows your personal preferences. It's pulling tech talent in off the streets. It's just that incredible. That's an outcome. Selling 10 coffee makers is an output, but it's not an outcome. And so one of the watch outs I would say is just making sure that your outcomes are not widgets. They're actually something that you're trying to achieve. And then remembering to ask yourself, like, why are we trying to achieve this? And then second would be making sure that that outcome is not so arduous or strict that you're running people into the ground. We know that people, in order to develop, need downtime. They need development time. They're human beings. And the goal is not to work them to a pulp. It's to give them a direction to go in and then the freedom with which to go in that direction, leaving time and room for development inside of that work.
Okay, I really love where this is going about having this big, picture and this big understanding about the organization and giving employees the time and the space and the wherewithal and the freedom to get there on their own. And it really, touches on one of the major 2024 trends that we're seeing with learning and development. And we certainly saw it with 2023, which, in addition to skills-based learning and development, which we'll talk about later, is, personalized L&D, super hot topic. This whole idea of like a one size fits all, like, here's your company course catalog, everybody take these courses, like that. We know that's dead. But how do you really, you talked about like an organizational vision and making sure people understand where they're going and making sure that's outcomes based. And you talked about giving people the freedom, but how do we really build personalized, personal L&D plans for employees in a scalable and engaging way?
I think probably not in the way that people typically think about it. I think then this is really where the idea of like co-creating and co-responsibility becomes essential. There is no way that L&D as one organization, one part of the organization, and I don't think I even care if it's 1-to-1, like one L&D person to one employee. There's no size of L&D that can feasibly be responsible for personalized development for every employee across the organization. Like, it's just not a tenable solution. And I think that personalized development then returns back to those foundations. Are you putting the right coffee bean into the right type of soil? And for me, that means the very first thing out the gate is, are you attracting and hiring curious talent? Like, kind of going back to those tenets, right? Like, you have to have the right soil, you have to have the right environment, the right mindset, and then are you hiring curious talent?
Yeah, curious. It's like such a key word. It's a very key word that you talk about a lot. Like, even when I just like talk to you, you often talk about curiosity and trying to inspire curiosity among your employees and trying to foster your own curiosity. And, when I talk to like our own customers that have just really high rates of adoption of learning and development in their organizations, and I ask them like, how do you do it? Like, I want to really share this with as a best practice, or how did you foster this? And they say it goes like that is a trait that they're looking for when they recruit. And often, or sometimes it's even so embedded in their culture that when I ask, like, how do you have a culture of learning and development like this? They're just like, they can't even pinpoint why. They're just like, people here want to learn. Um, so maybe you can talk a little bit more about curiosity, hiring for curiosity, fostering curiosity within your existing workforce. Because also there might be people here that are like, okay, well, from now on, I will hire curiosity, but like, what do I do?
Right, exactly.
With like my
I have
employees
some like
today?
tactical ideas that we can get into later, but I think number one is just kind of putting people in a situation where they have to develop the muscle of curiosity. So one of the things that we've talked about a lot at Rivi is in a stand-up meeting, just asking people kind of on your feet, what did you learn this week? And kind of laying the expectation as part of your job expectation, your role is that you're just generally curious and you're willing to share that curiosity. I think one thing that I deeply believe in is that curiosity doesn't have to necessarily always be job related. So you and I were just talking, I think like 2 weeks ago, about I've recently taken up woodworking, which is like such a random thing. But it truly translates. I think about how it translates to work on a regular basis. And so I think we have to be careful not to limit people's curiosity and what we're interested in hearing from them that they're curious about to work related things. And I think it's just so important because, first of all, if you're in the workforce development arena, whether that's HR, L&D, sales enablement, whatever, it's going to make your job easier to foster curiosity across the workforce. Curious people, research shows they make better decisions because they can think of alternatives. They're more innovative. They embrace changes more easily. Curiosity is actually very closely associated with both individual performance and team performance. So you're getting the multiplier effect, right? Like, you're not just getting one curious person. That curiosity is going to spread across the entire team. So yeah, I think it's so important, and really just giving people the space to share what they're curious about, whether it's work related or not, is super important.
Yeah, that's really interesting because like philosophically, like at Tiller, we are very focused on skills gaps related to roles. We're very focused on the skills that are required by the organization, the future skills that the organization is going to need, and keeping L&D like learning and development and that training as a business operation activity as opposed to a benefit or a perk. And so like when an organization encourages people like learn anything, like take the ukulele, like a wonderful benefit, a
Right.
wonderful perk. But how does it translate back to like how are we moving this business forward? How are we staying competitive? How are we helping you with your career development?
Yeah.
So that's something we like, think
Kind
about
of
and
wrestle
try
with.
to,
Research
yeah,
shows that it's directly correlated. Like there's no doubt about it. It's almost kind of like the D&I sort of initiatives. There you could draw a comparison there. Like from the outside, it may not seem like a business outcome that you're going for, or a business imperative, but it truly is. Like we know that the research shows that if you are a organization that is very accepting and promotes belonging and has diversity of every sort, from thought to racial diversity and gender diversity, your business outcomes will be better. End of story. If
yeah,
you hire for and um, just kind of manifest a place where people can be curious, your business outcomes will be better. End of story. It's just,
yeah, yeah, like, yes, yeah, yeah,
it's not a
yes,
perk.
yeah,
It's necessary. It's
yeah, yeah. So like what does it look like? What does it look like in terms of action and especially this organizational responsibility? At the different levels, what should an employee, where does an employee's responsibility over their own learning and development start and finish? Because I have also worked at places where it's like, go find anything you want to learn in the
sure,
world. Like that feels like kind of my
too
job, but
big.
also like not my job. Like shouldn't,
Yeah, exactly. I think
and
it becomes like very project based. That's the way I've started to really think about it, is especially, and this would be like an entirely different conversation, but as we think about gig economy coming down the pike, for us to start thinking about learning and development as project based is going to be really helpful, kind of thinking about our own skills and the way that we think about things. But using projects to allow employees to apply their skills and employees to develop their skills is a very tangible way to, and also document and track the skills that people have, which means that project managers and leads really need to either have a deep understanding of skills or work with L&D to have a deep understanding of skills that are needed for project completion, and have an understanding of who's on that project to contribute what skills versus who's on that project to develop what skills, and being able to track that using a system like Tiller is a perfect system to be able to do that with. And I think that's why I'm so drawn to you all as one of our vendors, is that you go beyond a typical LMS and you really are thinking strategically about how do we create an inventory of skills across our organization. It would make project planning and execution so much easier to then be tied to this personalized development sort of plan. Did that answer your question?
totally. That totally answers the question. And I love that idea of having like a skills profile for a role, having a skills profile for the project. Like, what skills do we need? What skills do we have on hand? Which of these skills are best taught in like this or developed in this, this type of framework of assigning somebody to the project and having them shadow or having them do the first iteration
Exactly.
of the work or having them review it and making that work a development opportunity. I know when we were choosing a title for this webinar, we almost like had an inclination of staying away from learning and development because you felt like it was too restrictive. Then I felt like people might feel misled or want to make sure that we get a learning and development audience. So we put it back in. but maybe like, is this an appropriate time to sort of speak to that, like
Touch
challenge
on
that
that?
you had
Sure.
around? Yeah.
Yeah. I think that it's not like L&D is not a bad word. Like it's not like a yucky word. I think it's so often associated with training. And I think that we can talk through an example of what this would look like in real life. But as we do that, you'll notice that I will say the word, I may not even say the word training. L&D at this point in the evolution of employee development, especially with personalized development, is not going to include training in a traditional sense, in my opinion. And so I have not like an allergy to the word L&D, but there's like a connotation there that either we need to work as an industry, we need to work towards changing or come up with some other word. In my opinion, like I said, in my opinion, I think not that training has no place at all. I think it's just becoming less and less relevant when we think about personalized development.
Yeah, I really like that. And one of the things, that I see that from my perspective of working with you that I've seen Riviera partners do is you've been really thoughtful about the types of content that you offer when it comes to L&D. From what I've seen, you author a tremendous amount of your own custom content. You've been really thoughtful about choosing your LMS partners in terms of the course catalogs. And I'd really love to like hear more about that, especially in the context of making the skills known to employees, giving them the freedom to learn. I know you have a really strong philosophy around
Yeah.
all of that.
Yeah. So we do create a lot of content. More than we can keep up with sometimes. But the reason for that is that it's very specific to our organization. So this is content that you're not going to find outside of Rivi. If there's a skill or knowledge, behavior, attitude that we're trying to encourage that is broader, that's where we go to our learning partners, like a LinkedIn Learning or providing funds to take a Udemy course or something like that. If it's very specific, so we have an internal proprietary system. We create all of our learning for that. We tend to call them resources versus training because we've set them up as, and I know you've commented on this before, we've set them up in very, we use the analogy of like a binder on a shelf. If you go and pull the course, which is what it's called, right? It's actually set up like a binder so that you can go in and just click into the binder section that you want to look at. We don't require, outside of obviously like mandatory courses, we don't require people to take many courses from start to finish. Going back to that personalized idea, they hopefully know where their gaps are in knowledge and will be conscientious enough to take the parts that they need. We also want them to feel like they can use it as when they need it versus take it all and then forget it ever existed. We want it to be that binder on the shelf. We want it to be a library of sorts that they're going to and pulling that resource down and using it in that moment. So all of our custom created content fits that need. If it doesn't fit that need, we don't create it. We outsource it.
Interesting. So it's like, seeing how you run that, it really harkens like the idea of like rapid cycles of continuous learning, of going, you're stuck, going to a resource, ideally like the, company sanctioned way that they want you to learn this if it's skill specific, and taking that. Where does like longer form, is there a role for formal, like long courses?
So I think that the tolerance of learners for those is lower right now. I don't, whether that's good or bad, I won't weigh in on, but I think just the tolerance is lower. And so we just try to make everything as bite-sized as possible. In theory, if they were to engage in all of the bite-sized pieces that fit their personalized need, they're then creating, oh, for some reason, Siri thinks I'm talking to her. They are then creating their own long form training in essence, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So using the same example of like the coffee maker,
Sure.
what is L&D's responsibility in like that context of delivering and developing the workforce's like skill set and delivering on that desired outcome.
Yeah. So if we go one step back, when we're talking about like co-responsibility and co-creating, I always like zoom out before I zoom in. I would say we really have to still talk about the organization's responsibility. And the organization's responsibility is like distilled down is into setting, communicating, and executing on clear expectations. If you can't set, communicate, and then execute on expectations, again, kind of going back to those foundations, you're going to struggle. And so their first responsibility then is to make sure that they're communicating. So if we're using the AI coffee maker for an example, they might hold an all hands where they're announcing this new project. They're checking for understanding with their people managers. I used to use this analogy of like, if the CEO stops you, you run into the CEO at a gas station and they ask you what your role is at the company, can you say how your role is contributing to the overarching goals of the organization? And I think that you could flip that and say like, hey, CEO, if you ask your people managers what your outcome is that they're working on and they can't articulate it, you have some work to do. You need to go back and re-communicate and figure out how to get them to understand the direction that you're going in. And that's on you as a leader. And then they're also responsible for providing the budget. And that's not just dollars, that's also time, like we talked about, making sure that people have time for the development of the individuals that are going to make this luxurious coffee machine. So they have announced the project, they make sure everyone understands why they're going in this direction. They have the people selected for the team, and then they make sure that those people are developed either ahead of time on the skills that need to be developed ahead of time or during the course of the project. And then to your point, they're also responsible for providing the tools for learning. So whether that's custom content that is very specific to the company knowledge, or it's high quality external content, which might look like bringing in AI experts that are working in food tech for Ask Me Anythings or small group interviews. And then the last thing I would say that they're responsible for is making sure that their internal and external job and project postings are very clear about the skills that are needed for the project and areas that they're willing to develop skills. So it really makes it clear for those that are trying to get into the organization or get onto that project, what is needed and what they can expect to learn on those projects.
That's something we think and talk about a lot at Tiller, about like what skills actually are required from day one and what skills can be developed in-house after the person is hired. And that's going to become increasingly important,
I think so too.
with all this emerging technology and emerging skills.
It's, I mean, if you're the person putting that project together, you're asking yourself, like, what skills can I buy, build, or borrow, right? Yeah. Like, what skills am I going to pay people to bring to the table? What skills am I willing to build? And what skills am I going to outsource?
Yeah, it's like, it's key and it's like critical.
So then to answer your actual question,
yeah,
L&D's responsibility then would be first to understand the skills. So working with the project team that's developing this incredible coffee machine to understand the skills that are needed from R&D through the production, sales, marketing. And I think that this is where a lot of us in L&D are getting stuck, and we're not really seeing like the coffee farm for the beans, so to speak. We're thinking about skills in a very accessible way. And I think we need to all like take a deep breath and like, what do we need people to do? End of story. Like, what do we need people to do? And you and I have had this conversation a lot, because when we first started working with you, I was like, but what does that skill mean? Like, what does that skill really mean? And so what we started to do at Rivi is put together custom skill definitions. So at Rivi, this skill means, critical thinking means, and then we lay it out as it pertains to the roles that we have at Rivi. And that's a lot easier to assess than some kind of generic definition that's coming from the outside. It doesn't mean that we don't look at those definitions to inform our skill definitions, but at the end of the day, we just need to know what we need people to be able to do. And that's the skills.
Yeah, like it's like funny because when you say it like that, it's like it's so simple, but like yeah, right?
Right.
I don't even know.
So then,
like, yeah.
For the AI coffee machine, that might look like research skills about food tech, about AI. Like, what does that look like for your organization? Might look like communication skills, innovation skills, creativity skills. So like take your outcome and work backwards from that. What are you trying to get to? What's the outcome you're trying to get to and why? And then what sorts of skills do you need people to have in order to be able to do that? The second thing that L&D would be responsible for then is addressing the skills gaps. So as they're working with the project managers or the project leads, understanding kind of what skills are being brought to the table. What are those skills that you're buying by paying people at your organization, or buying by hiring people? What are the skills that you're willing to build, and how can L&D support that? And what skills are just not going to be feasible to buy or build in the course of this project, and what should you outsource? Then the next piece would be career planning for L&D. So after this awe-inspiring success of this AI coffee machine, where are these employees going to go next? How can we support them in using the skills that they've just developed in this project in another project? And really helping them knowing what their goals are and how they mesh with the career goals of with the goals of the organization, and how do we move those in tandem. And I would say the last thing is organizational development. So really helping support the organization and the people managers specifically via tools, the resources we just talked about, consultation, really just having conversations with them. What is your team? What goal is your team trying to meet? How does that roll up into the larger objective? And how can we support you and help in getting there?
I love it. I love it in that it's like, that's really like learning and development has a lot of dimensions to it, and play a really powerful role in the outcomes of the business and also in people's careers, and helping them, come to work every day and be successful in what they're supposed to do, and, set them up for success and not failure, and help them make sure that when they're finished doing that, they can go on and like do something else amazing, whether it's at your organization or beyond.
Exactly. And training might be part of that. Like I certainly don't want to like throw training under the bus. Training might be part of that, but it's a piece of all four of those larger sections, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm just keeping an eye on the time, and we're 2 minutes to 2:00. And
oh goodness, look at us.
I know. We knew this would happen.
We did. You want me to like run through really fast kind of what people managers and individuals would look like? Because I think the co-creation piece. So people managers in this situation, they are really there to run the project and to make sure that their teams are getting coaching, using work or development opportunities, making sure that they understand how they fit into the larger organization. They're also going to be identifying areas where they can mix and match skills. So one thing, so in this situation of the AI coffee machine, you might have a person on the team that their research skills are like top notch, but their executive share outs are way too long and arduous and boring, and they're not getting good feedback from execs on their share outs. You might pair that person with someone that is a communications whiz that wants to learn more about research methodologies. So going back to Tiller and having this skills inventory, knowing how to mix and match skill sets so that people are supporting each other and coaching each other, gets back to that personalized learning and development. And then the last piece, the individual, I think we've kind of swung the pendulum in the last 10 years from it's the organization's responsibility to provide L&D to it's all on the individual. That has to be your responsibility. And I think just like with most things in business, it's in the middle. And for individuals, like it's obviously easier if you've hired your curious people at the outset. But they really need to know what's expected of them. They need to be encouraged to be learners. And they need to have the self-awareness to be able to think critically about their skills. So the individual might actually be the one that raises their hand and says like, hey, boss, I'm really looking to learn more about research methodology, but I have a ton of communications experience that I'd be happy to share with someone. Can you pair me up with someone that I can swap skills with? And then they also just need to be really proactive in using the company provided resources to educate themselves. And then also be curious outside of work and bring all of those, all that knowledge to work every day.